Hey everybody, this is Maxine Taylor with a wonderful show called Astrology 201. I hope you've been following along, and if you've gotten lost at all, go to YouTube and remember that these shows, the beginning shows, Astrology 101, are available on YouTube. So you can review and then pick up where you left off with us. So today we're going to be talking about the planet Saturn. Now, just to recap, okay, we talked earlier in earlier segments about the sun. I'm going to use the 10th house because it's so obvious when things are in the 10th house. The sun, the center of our life, when it's in the 10th house, your popularity soars. The sun shines a light on everything it touches. It is the giver of life. Then we talked briefly about the moon, and it goes through each sign in 1 month. Moves very, very quickly. It determines our moods. And when it's in your 10th house, you are instinctively drawn to being in the limelight. So if you have a meeting that you're running, if you need to speak to a group of people as a leader, if you can get the moon up there, wonderful. Okay? In other words, time the meeting for when you have the moon in your 10th house. Next, we talked about Venus. Venus is what we love. It is beauty. It is everything gorgeous. And so with Venus in your 10th house, you are incredibly popular. This is your time to just stand there and smile because everybody's going to want to be around you. You're a natural leader at that point. Then we talked about Mercury. Wherever Mercury is what you think about and what you talk about. So you're thinking about your career, you're talking about it, and in your career you are the leader who communicates. Then we talked about Mars. Mars, wherever Mars is what you throw yourself into. It's what comes first to you. It's what you're willing to fight for. And so with Mars in your 10th house, of course, it's very different than Venus, isn't it? Venus is loving. And then, of course, we dealt with Jupiter. Jupiter is the great benefic. It bestows joy and popularity, very, very different from Mars that says, out of my way, I'm moving up in my career. Okay, today we are going to be talking about the planet Saturn. And so I'm going to clear this off so we can focus exclusively on Saturn. In old-timey textbooks, Saturn is called the planet of fear and restriction. Well, I don't happen to subscribe to that. What I've learned over the years, and I started studying astrology in 1966. Some of you weren't even born then, were you? 1966, and all the old-timey astrology books said, oh, be afraid of Saturn. And so its reputation has preceded it. It's just been incredibly difficult to deal with. Let me tell you what Saturn really means. Saturn is the planet of responsibility. Now, you might say, I don't want responsibility. When I say responsibility, I mean respond to your ability. And Saturn, when we draw it, looks a lot like this, like a sickle, and people are afraid of it. If you will respond to your ability, you will find that you're taking charge of your life. You're doing what needs to be done. And there's nothing better than Saturn to help you do that. Now, Saturn has a 28 to 30 year cycle as it moves around our charts. And we did the Sun, Moon, Mercury, Venus, Mars, and Jupiter, and now we're getting into the slower moving heavy planets like Saturn, Neptune, Uranus, and Pluto. The longer a planet stays in one house, the more impact it has, okay? So when you respond to your ability, Saturn allows you to be your highest and best, to express your talents and your abilities. Saturn stays in one sign for 2.5 years. So you really grow up wherever Saturn is. Now, I'm going to talk about the angles of the chart because a lot of you study astrology and you know about them. I haven't talked about them in depth in the earlier segments of this Astrology 201 series because I just wanted to give you the idea of the planets. The angles are the cusps of the first house, the fourth house, the seventh house, and the 10th house. The first house is you. It's your physical appearance. It is your personality. And what I'm going to do is carry you through Saturn, through each of the houses. I'm the kind of astrologer whose mantra is, there's nothing wrong with you, deal with it. And on the positive side, you are fabulous, deal with it. Saturn helps you put into practical, tangible use what you have to offer. Wherever Saturn is in your chart, if it sits on the ascendant, you take charge of your life. A lot of people are concerned about that because they feel it's going to be responsibility, meaning burden. What it is you taking charge. The last time Saturn crossed my ascendant, I'll never forget, it was wonderful. It doesn't make you mean. It doesn't make you fearful. What it does is has you saying, look, this is how it's going to be. The buck stops here. And that's what it is. And so as Saturn moves through your first house, you still take charge. When it hits your fourth house, the fourth house cusp, the nadir, the IC rather, of the chart, let's just call it the cusp of the fourth house. This area is the end of one segment and the beginning of another. It can be a life segment, a job segment. This gives you the golden opportunity to end those things that you want to let go of and move forward into a new direction. When Saturn sits on your seventh cusp of partnership, it does not mean that your partner is going to be a burden to you. It doesn't mean that your relationships are going to be negative. No. What it means is that you can make your partnership tangible, real. When Saturn crosses your seventh cusp, you come to the attention of the public. Many, many years ago, I mean many, after I had studied astrology and after I had gotten it legalized here, first in Cobb County and then in the city of Atlanta, Saturn crossed my seventh cusp. Yes, I did end a relationship with a boyfriend at the time, but I feel it was because I came to the attention of the public. Remember, I was Georgia's first licensed astrologer. There was nobody else. And so I took my interactions with other people very, very seriously. I was always frightened and very apprehensive before a client was supposed to arrive because I wanted so much to do the best job I could. So I took my partnerships, my relationships with others seriously. When Saturn is at the top of your chart, now remember, it stays in each sign for 2.5 years, so that it's not going to whip through the zodiac and go from partnership, speeding its way up to your midheaven, which is the top of the chart. But when it's at the top of your chart, you are at the top of your game. And any astrologer can tell you when that's going to be happening because you want to plan for it. When it then moves back into this quadrant, this is more socializing and then working behind the scenes in order to get things organized. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to take you through Saturn going through each of the houses. Let's do it the way we've been doing it and start, well, you know what? Last time when I talked about Jupiter and Mars, I started with the 12th house. Normally I start with the first. So let's start with the 12th house. Okay. With Saturn in your 12th house, you're very serious about your solitude and your privacy. I have found that the 12th house, according to traditional astrology, can often bring a feeling of sorrow and sadness. And I think it's, not every day, but I think it's because the 12th house is the spirit plane. And we all really just want to go home. And so with Saturn in your 12th house, this is a wonderful opportunity to work behind the scenes, to prepare, to write books, to do videos perhaps. This is the time of preparation behind the scenes, because when Saturn crosses your ascendant and moves into your first house, you will feel wiser, stronger. Your physical body can be stronger, depending on what sign is on your ascendant. If you have Aries on the ascendant, that rules the head. If you have Sagittarius, it rules the hips. And I'll go through the ascendants with you at some point. Maybe we'll have time today to do that. Whatever sign is on your ascendant, that is the area of your body that you want to take charge of, you want to take care of, because Saturn helps you make everything tangible. It makes it real, and you then can heal whatever is going on with your physical body, because that's the first house, with practical, logical attention, whether it's homeopathic, chiropractic, osteopathic, or traditional medical. I stumble over that because I use the non-traditional ones. But Saturn in your first house helps you grow up. Now you might say, well, I'm in my 40s or 50s or 60s or whatever. I feel like I have grown up. Yes, you have, but you have another shot at it. And I am going to be talking with you about the Saturn return, which is incredibly powerful, in just a minute. So you grow up with Saturn in your first house. Now, as Saturn moves into your second house, a lot of people are really frightened because they've read those old-timey astrology books that say, oh, Saturn is restriction, it's fear. You know when Saturn is restriction and fear? When you do not take charge of your life, when you do not take your responsibilities, when you do not respond to your abilities. When you take charge, when you respond to your ability on a financial level, Saturn becomes your friend. Saturn makes it tangible for you. Don't you love that part of it? Recently, a friend of mine has had Saturn in her second house. She looked at all the expenses that she has. She looked at her health club membership. She looked at consolidating her bills. She bought a new car because she was able to get a brand new car for less than she was paying for her 5-year-old car. This is Saturn going through your second house. So as we move through in the second half of this show, I will give you more details on this marvelous planet as it moves through each of the houses. Remember, Saturn means respond to your abilities. So in just a short break, we'll be back. Hey everybody, we're back looking at Saturn, hopefully for those of you who study astrology through new eyes, because Saturn, we just finished Saturn in the second house. Saturn in the second house does not restrict your money. It tells you to get wise and get smart about your money. And if you do that, Saturn rewards and makes tangible what you've been working for. It is just incredible what we've been told about Saturn. It's just not true in every single case. The planets don't make you do anything. They simply reflect where you're at. And if you have a positive attitude and if you take full and complete responsibility for being the creator of your life and everything that happens in it, Saturn is your best buddy. I can tell you that. It's only when you're not taking full responsibility that you moan and say, oh, when is Saturn going to leave me alone? Saturn's not doing anything to you. Saturn's showing you how you can take charge of your life and in what areas you can take charge so that you can be your highest and your best. Okay, so Saturn in the second, do not worry about it. Saturn in the third, very, very interesting. Saturn is practical and logical and tangible, and your thinking becomes more realistic. Does it mean you're going to be morose? and somber. No, not at all. This is the time that you actually sit down and write that book you've been talking about writing for years. You finish it up. This is the time that you think practically and logically. This is when you consider your words before you blurt them out, okay? This is a really cool placement for Saturn. Saturn in the 4th house. Excuse me, my handwriting is not looking real good today. Saturn in the 4th house. You take your responsibility with your family. Now, a lot of people who have a prominent Saturn in their birth chart are what we call old head on young shoulders. With Saturn, you may find yourself taking inappropriate responsibility. That's when it becomes a burden. When Saturn's in your 1st house, you realize, wait a minute, I'm responsible for me. If you have children, it's a different story. But once those children are of age, it's time for you to take charge of your life, and your example sets it for them. And that's what Saturn's teaching us. Okay, so Saturn in the 4th house, you may find yourself taking inappropriate responsibility for family members. Keep in mind, that enables them. That can cripple them. And this may be the time that you build that dream house of yours, because Saturn in the 4th helps you make your real estate and home dreams tangible. Okay, let's look at Saturn in the 5th. Now, you may be saying, my goodness, Saturn is serious, and this is the house of fun and games. I want to have fun. With Saturn there, you can have fun. You may not be hanging from a chandelier or dancing with a lampshade on your head, but if you, let's say that you have always wanted to be on a professional sports team and you're really good at the sport that you're involved in. Okay, 5th house is fun. Sports are fun. Games. Sports are games. This may be when you try out for that arena team, or when you get really serious if you're in college and you change your major to what you really want to do, which is athletics. So with Saturn in your 5th house, you can make your fun tangible. Now, the 5th house deals with your children. And with Saturn in that 5th house, your kids are very responsible, very mature, but you may feel like they're holding you down a teeny bit. If you will take your responsibility with them to help them take their responsibility, you will raise beautifully mature children. And it's never too late. Okay, Saturn in your 6th house. Very, very interesting. This is you being in command at work. Not the career, but at work. This is you taking on the job and seeing that it gets done correctly. Not taking on other people's job. Your job. I love that part. Okay. Saturn in the 7th house. With Saturn in the 7th, you take your partnerships, your relationship with other people very seriously. As I mentioned, when many years ago I had legalized astrology, Saturn entered my 7th house and I came to the attention of the public. That's what Saturn can do, because the 7th house is the public. Your partner, your business partner, may become more serious or may take his or her responsibility. Hallelujah. Your spouse may do the same thing, but your relationships with other people are very, very important to you. Now remember, when Saturn is in the 7th house, it is moving up toward the midheaven, the top of your chart. It will take 2.5 years to go through a sign. But when Saturn's in your 7th house, that is when you want to start preparing to be on top, at the top of your game, at the top of your career, whatever that happens to be. I have a dear friend who does workshops all over the country, and Saturn is in his 7th house now. He's learning the lessons of partnership, but it's moving up toward his midheaven, toward the top of the chart. And I told him that he would be the public speaker, the leader that he wants to be in, I think it's going to be another 3 years. He's thrilled. It makes the road easier when you know what's going on. Saturn in the 8th house. Very, very interesting placement. The 8th house is the house of other people's money, mundanely. Are they going to hold you up? Are they going to not pay you what they owe you? No, not at all. What is going to happen is that you're going to get very practical and very logical with your mutual finances. Saturn is reality. The 8th house deals with all kinds of secrets, and you're going to get to the bottom of things. You're going to be looking at metaphysics, perhaps. You're going to be looking at the astral plane, at dreams. This is you taking your responsibility to look beneath the surface at what is really going on. Saturn in the 9th house, you get very clear on your philosophy of life and on the principles you want to live by. It's that simple. And yes, you can travel if you want to. Now, remember I said when Saturn's at the top of your chart, then it moves into your 10th house. You are the leader. I hope that you have achieved what you're looking for, but you've got about maybe a year to a year and a half, depending on your chart, to get that Saturn in place and be the leader that you came here to be, to get your career going. Saturn in the 11th house, very, very interesting. You can get very practical and very logical with groups of people. You take your responsibility as a friend and with your friends. This helps you become a humanitarian. It's very beautiful. And then last but not least, of course, Saturn then moves into the 12th house, which is what we've talked about. Now, a lot of you are familiar with astrology and you understand the Saturn return. I'm going to go into it. Every planet returns to its natal place in your chart at some point in time. The sun returns to its natal place every year, and we call that a solar return. It happens on your birthday, either up to 2 days before your birthday or 2 days after your birthday. Now, Saturn, very interestingly, has a 28-year cycle. This is what we're talking about when we have a Saturn return. Let's pretend, shall we, that Saturn, let's just put Saturn, let's say in your birth chart, you have Saturn in the 1st house. You were born with Saturn in your 1st house. So this is you being very responsible, mature beyond your years. You feel like the oldest or the only child. You may not be, but with Saturn in the 1st, you act like, you feel as if you are the oldest or the only child, even if you are the youngest. Okay, when you're 7 years old, Saturn, I'm going to move these out of the way here. Saturn is in, it forms what's called a square. It's an aspect to your natal Saturn. And this can be a problem because as a little child, you're locking horns with authority figures. Okay, at 14, you're doing it again. At 21, you have another square to the Saturn because at 21, you know it all, don't you? Not necessarily. When you're 21, when you have that final Saturn square, this is you locking horns with authority figures. What you want to look at is your Saturn return. Because when Saturn sits on its natal place in your chart, what happens is you get a face full of reality. This will occur between the ages of 28 and 32, usually around 29. And Saturn, of course, being one of the slower planets, retrogrades. It goes back and forth over its own place. It goes back and forth in the zodiac. And so there's Saturn sitting on itself. It kicks it into shape. It kicks it into action. This can be very difficult, and I think this is what a lot of people are talking about when they refer to the Saturn return. If you have not looked realistically at what's going on in your life. Now, if you have Saturn natally in the 1st, when Saturn comes back to its natal place, you are faced with your own reality. And you have a choice then. You can either belly up and say, oh, woe is me, or you can say, okay, This is reality. This is what I came here to do. This is what I came here to be. And you will take responsibility for that. Now, the same thing's going to happen when you're 60. It happens when you're 30. It'll happen again when you're 60. What my experience is, and my observation as well, the second Saturn return when you're 60 is a lot easier than the first Saturn return when you're 29 or 30, because what that does is you wake up to the fact when you're 29 or 30 that you don't know it all, that you don't have what you'd like to have perhaps, and that what you thought was not necessarily true. At 60, it's much easier. I haven't hit 90 yet, but I'll let you know when I do. So the Saturn return is very frightening to a lot of people, and it doesn't have to be. That's the whole point. Now, I know at this point you're saying, I want to know where Saturn is in my chart. Well, if you will contact me at MaxineTaylor.com, send me your birth data, the month, day, and I will let you know where everything is in your chart, so that when you look at these at the zodiac as I describe it to you, it will make sense to you. And then, of course, if you have questions on anything, you can contact me at MaxineTaylor.com. Saturn is one of the planets that is very important because in traditional astrology, as I mentioned, it's traditionally the planet of fear, and that is simply not true. So I hope that you have enjoyed this segment on Saturn. I will get your charts out to you just as soon as I can. Now, next time, we're going to talk about the planet Uranus. If Saturn is restriction, responsibility, reality, responding to your abilities, and it's traditional and logical, get ready for Uranus, because Uranus is called the planet, the Great Awakener. And what you're going to do is love hearing about Uranus. So join me next week when once again we take a look at the transits going on.